Well, I was born in 1943, Robert Allen Slater, and I was always Robert until I went to Duntroon, the military college, and I was called Bob from then on. Ah. When I came back from Vietnam, I went to the School of Military Engineering in what was called the Depot Squadron. And the Depot Squadron was where all new recruits, regular and reserve, came to after they went to Kapooka. Kapooka being the recruit training battalion. And then we trained them to be engineers. And we also had the recruit training for Vietnam. So it was a Vietnam training wing. And the different wings in SME used to train them in the different aspects, whether it be field engineering like mines and demolitions, or the plant wing for the plant operators, or engineer services wing for those who are other trades. We were the ones who coordinated all their activity and made sure they did all their pre-Vietnam physical training to get their shape, their physical shape ready to enduring for over there. So that was as an instructor and also the administration too, because once again we had all these, apart from the regular army guys, all these national servicemen who were still going through the transition from a civilian life into a military life, and they had all their needs of, some were still a bit homesick and so on. So, and once again, people were everything. If you don't have people, you don't have an army. And going back to my staff college days, one of the most interesting and instructive little forums we had that the Commandant devised was the importance of the chaplain and the doctor in a unit. Now in peacetime, we aren't always fortunate enough to have, not every unit has a doctor and a chaplain appointed to them. But those who have, it's important to know how to use them. And of course, in a regiment or battalion where the commanding officer is a lieutenant colonel, the next rank within the service, within that unit, would be a major, the second in command, and all the sub-unit commanders, companies and squadrons are majors. But the doctors and the chaplains have the rank of captain, which in the unit is a much lower rank. So what this forum that we did at Staff College was made us realise that although they might have been a lower rank, the importance of them to the well-being of your soldiers, you had to really take them into your confidence, because although they used to have confidential chats with soldiers, which they wouldn't divulge, they could give you an idea what in colloquial terms, the vibe would be, to let you know if there's anything that you should attend to, not because any individual had gone and complained about it, or said, so you didn't hold the individual responsible or anything. It wasn't like a whistleblower, it was in a more general sense of getting an idea about things you need to do, make a bit of a change that would be better for the unit. So I always maintained that any time I had a doctor or particularly a chaplain attached to me, I made sure that I let them know that they could come and see me anytime they wanted to and talk to me in confidence, so that we could do whatever we could to take into account anything they were able to impart to me.
So the well-being of the collective for the end result, being the far greater goal.
Yeah, but the individual often was the person who was the indicator.
That's part of, I think, the most important part of how we should be collaborating across every goal.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that happened within your works and within your services, and I can tell by your sharing that there's a lot of depth to your understanding of the human condition, as we call it. So I want to thank you for your work in those things. Because obviously being an engineer and being able to do the things that you've done are extremely important, but obviously for the benefit and the well-being of others. So do you see many people from the past that you've watched grow and change? Do you have many stay in touch?
Well, there are 3 levels of getting in touch. One level is my done-through class, and we've for the first 15 or 20 years, we only came across each other if we were posted in the same areas. But then as we all started to leave the regular army, we started to have 5-year reunions. More recently, we've been having 2-year reunions as time was getting shorter. And we've mainly gone back to Canberra to have our reunion around the graduation time.
So the graduation of new people graduating?
Yeah.
So do you get to mix with new graduates at Duntree?
Yes. Well, what the format was the parade. We'd be sitting there watching the parade, and after the parade, all the new graduates and their families and anybody else who were visitors would go to Duntree House into the lawns and have morning tea. Now you could mix around, but usually though the new graduates were busily introducing their families to their own friends,
Their new friends,
and we were generally mixing with each other, not having seen each other for a couple of years, and our wives and so on. So yeah, but it was a bit of mixing.
Excellent. So speaking of wives, in all of this you've had a private life. Please explain. You've obviously a wife. When did you get married?
We got married in 1966.
Okay.
So 58 years ago. We had a reunion recently. It was our 60th anniversary in graduation. And of the 57, 80 of us started in our class. 57 graduated. And of those 57, something like 43 are still alive. And most of us still have original wives. There are only, I think, about 4 or 5 who've remarried. And of all the wives, only 3 of those wives have died. So they've got a greater longevity than the fellows.
Oh, okay. And so did your wife have children?
Well, both of us had 3 children and now 9 grandchildren.
Okay. And suggest, what would your encouragement be for new people that are thinking about joining the Defence Services?
Well, it certainly is a very fulfilling life. It's very instructive thinking back to why I wanted to join. As a boy, I never really had a great longing to be in the services. I did join school cadets, and I think it's a great shame we don't have school cadets. I think it's a great shame we don't have some kind of national service to give people some sort of feeling of service and some kind of connection. I think to some extent a lot of the problems we're having now with youth, where we're finding them at a loose end and doing a lot of destructive things, and all putting it down to mental health, to a large extent is because, for whatever reason, they don't have any boundaries and don't have any feeling of purpose. And a national service of some kind, and even school cadets, gives you some kind of boundaries there. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's something that really shapes people. I remember when I was at the School of Military Engineering in that depot squadron, I got a letter from a farmer in West Australia. He came from 3 Springs, which is somewhere east of Geraldton, which is the middle of nowhere, and he said that his son was called up, and because it was his only son, and he relied on him to work on the farm, he went to his local Member of Parliament to try and get him exempted, and he wasn't successful. And he said his son went off for national service. He said, he's now come back. He said, thinking back, even though I relied on him on the farm, he was pretty lazy. But since he's come back, he said, I can't stop him. I don't know what you did to him, but thanks. Now, I didn't know the son because he'd gone through before my time. But I saw so many young people coming into the service, and during that time learnt a lot about themselves and went out, I think, much stronger people than when they came in. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and that also applies to anybody who joins up voluntarily.
Could do to be able to try and encourage youth to get on a better track through the Defence Forces here that you think's missing?
I think there's very little that the Defence Force itself can do. It comes back to politicians having an insight into what the country needs. So in the 1950s, when the school cadets were at its height, and national service, the 3-month national service was at its height, but in the days when most politicians, most of the successful politicians, had seen war service, and they saw the value of that service. It's a long time since we've had any politicians with war service. Luckily, our local member Keith Wallahan has, and he sees the value of that service. So hopefully he'll go a long way in Parliament and bring some of those values to Parliament. As I see it, the reason why school cadets and the National Service were disbanded was it happened at a time when the regular army was just becoming a strong force, and their first priority was to build up a permanent army and weren't looking beyond that into a national force. And it got to a point where the late 50s and early 60s, when the old wartime politicians were dying off, that the politicians couldn't see the value. The regular army was saying, we need all the instructors to build up a regular army. And the politicians couldn't see the value in seeing the national service and cadets as a more national thing, not just a military thing. And so they let it drop. Of course, we got the national service in the 60s purely because we committed to Vietnam, and the only way we could maintain the commitment is to get national service to build up the numbers. And it was a very selective thing. It loses the community universality if you don't have a universal national service, boys and girls.
Narrow.
Yeah. I think one way they could do it would be if they had a universal national service for maybe a year as a gap year after VCE and the equivalents in other states, where those who are physically able and psychologically suited might go into the services, but others could go out back and do a work of some kind.
Yes.
And
something structural.
Yeah, and the way in which it could be done would be the people in charge could be people who've retired from the military, who've got all that training, but employed not by the military, but employed as a national service body, a bit like we've got border force. It could be, community force or something like that, to oversee it all, so there's a bit of a regimentation. But the way you'd have to bring it in would be, you'd have to bring it in as something that's going to be in eight years' time. So that if it's going to be for 18-year-olds, you've got to convince 10-year-olds that in 8 years' time they're going to go in. You're not going to be able to tell anybody at 16 you're going to go in 2 years' time. It also would give time to build up a structure that's going to work from day one. So the first people coming into the National Service scheme aren't being stuffed around and feel they're guinea pigs. You've got to have a system going beforehand that's working, but you could use all that talent that comes out of the military. Some people have great difficulty settling into civil life after the military, but if you give them like an instructor role that's for the youth, and not just military but outback as well, because so many of the military people have got those skills, tradespeople, they've got management skills, or people management skills. men and women, and they could be put into those roles of overseeing all sorts of things, infrastructure, community welfare, whatever. Even as extra support to the police in outback areas that they need those extra bodies.